We miss you, Malcolm Jamal. You guys know Malcolm Jamal had a message to everybody out there, especially the highly weird. And honey, I got the messages. You got it right. Grandma Gigi is on the case. And we miss Malcolm Jamal, and we want to let him know we love him. And we know he watching over us, right? Honey, he was in that darn ocean, and it took him. But he saved his 8-year-old daughter. But guess what? People are saying there's more to the story. I came across this video. Y'all gotta watch it with me. And let's find out what's going on with Malcolm and his last message. Check this out, y'all. Check it out.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner, dead at the age of 54 on a drowning accident while he was vacationing with his family in Costa Rica.
I am tired of running for shade. And aren't you tired of being hustled and played? And aren't we all tired of crying about how hard it is to be black in America, even if it looks like we've got it made?
Has this been difficult for you?
Yeah. Because when you watch someone who you know and love, go through what he's going through.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the beloved actor who rose to fame as Theo Huxtable, is gone. And his final message? It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a warning.
And if for some reason you can't find a reason to smile, then that's probably the best time to be the reason for somebody else to smile.
And now that he's passed, people are starting to ask the real questions. Why wasn't anyone listening? Why does it feel like every time someone speaks out, do they end up silenced?
But freedom has its limits, so here we are. Tear-streaked and salt-stained faces. Traces of trauma and pain lace our DNA like our black pride is cut and laced with self-hate.
Was this just another tragedy? Or part of a pattern that's getting too hard to ignore? Let's get into it. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's sudden death has left fans in shock and others in deep suspicion. The 54-year-old actor, beloved for his role as Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show, reportedly drowned while vacationing with his family in Costa Rica. Authorities claim it was a tragic accident, a drowning caused by strong currents off the coast of Cocles Beach in Lyman.
Reports that the 54-year-old was in Costa Rica on a family vacation and accidentally drowned while swimming.
The Associated Press reported that the local police initially reported that Warner was rescued by people on the beach. But first responders from Costa Rica's Red Cross found him without vital signs, and he was taken to the morgue. But the story doesn't sit right with everyone. The timing, the circumstances, and, most disturbingly, the message he left behind just days before his death. All of it feels too eerie to ignore. Warner wasn't just on vacation. He was on a mission to tell the truth.
Can you tell me the fate of the people who consciously take the bait and embrace the very traits placed upon them by their captors who by design are inclined to keep them believing they're second rate? I'll wait.
In the final episode of his podcast, Not All Hood, released just 2 days before his passing, Warner delivered what fans are now calling his farewell message in disguise. And what he spoke about wasn't lighthearted or surface level. It was raw. It was urgent, and it was deeply personal. Warner reflected on a recent exchange he had with spoken word artist Tamika Georgia Me Harper, who challenged his podcast's title. When he told her it was called Not All Hood, she immediately interrupted, "Ain't nothing wrong with the hood." That brief comment sent Warner down a spiral of reflection. He realized that the media has long sold one version of black culture, the hood narrative, while ignoring the richness, the nuance, and the power behind it.
The reason for the title is combating the narrative of black life, black culture that the media focuses on.
He wasn't distancing himself from the hood. He was calling out the system that exploits and misunderstands it. In his own words, the hood side, ultimately, historically, is what has always created American culture. That's not just a cultural observation. That's a bold truth about appropriation, invisibility, and stolen legacy, a truth Hollywood has spent decades trying to silence. But Warner didn't stop there. He also got personal about how his views on terms like black excellence had evolved. Once skeptical of the phrase because of its attachment to fame and wealth, Warner said a conversation about black soldiers being erased from Arlington National Cemetery's historical records changed his perspective. Black survival in of itself is black excellence, he said. Not fame, not awards, not money.
We're not all hood. The black community is not a monolith. There's so many levels and lanes to the black community, and we wanted to have a space where we could acknowledge, discuss all of those lanes.
Just survival. That line hit hard then, and it hits even harder now, knowing how suddenly his own life was cut short. It's almost as if Warner sensed something, as if he knew his time was limited, and he wanted his final message to center the truth of black endurance, struggle, and resilience. And just like that, within 48 hours of dropping this powerful, vulnerable conversation, he was gone. For a whole generation, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was, and in many ways still is, known as Theo Huxtable, as the friendly, sometimes silly, always likable only son on The Cosby Show. He became a regular presence in millions of homes. His role as Theo, a teen dealing with things like dyslexia, growing up, and the calm advice of his parents, helped shape a lasting image of someone kind, steady, and relatable. This image stuck with him for years, which brings up an important question. Who is the real Malcolm-Jamal Warner behind that positive public image? Looking into the controversies and tragedies of his life doesn't reveal scandal or drama caused by him. Instead, it shows a man who has quietly faced serious challenges, from painful personal loss to the heavy legacy of a show now overshadowed by controversy. Through it all, Warner has stayed thoughtful, steady, and true to himself. By exploring how he handled the fallout from the Bill Cosby scandal, how he coped with heartbreak, and how he avoided the downfall that hits many child stars, we see a different side of him. Someone who turned tough experiences into strength and grew into a mature and respected artist.
It's difficult not to, not to feel something, have some kind of emotional response to, what this person is going through.
The biggest and most difficult controversy in Malcolm-Jamal Warner's career wasn't something he caused. It was something he got pulled into because of his connection to Bill Cosby. Warner's response showed just how complicated the situation was. He found himself caught between personal loyalty, public pressure, and the emotional weight of being part of a show that meant so much to American culture. To really understand his reaction, you need to know how close he was to Cosby. Cosby didn't just work with Warner, he shaped his life. He chose 13-year-old Warner for the role of Theo after a nationwide search. On set, Cosby led by example. Warner often said that despite being a huge star, Cosby never acted like it, and that taught him how to stay grounded. Cosby also gave him creative advice, like avoiding trendy slang so the show wouldn't feel outdated. Years later, Warner said this was true. When he watched the show with his daughter, it still held up. Their bond was a mix of mentorship and fatherly guidance, which made the later scandal even more painful for Warner.
My biggest feeling is I feel sad for, just the way this whole, just the way the whole story has come about.
When over 50 women came forward accusing Cosby of SA, Warner was pushed into the spotlight. His response wasn't a simple defense. It was careful and emotional. In a 2015 interview, he said, "He's one of my mentors. Just as it's painful to hear any woman talk about SA, whether true or not, it's just as painful to watch my friend and mentor go through this." That one quote shows how torn he was, wanting to respect the victims while also admitting how hard it was to watch someone he looked up to fall. He didn't defend Cosby, but he also didn't turn his back on him. As he put it, "I can't defend him, but I won't throw him under the bus either." Warner also criticized how the media handled the story, calling it a circus and pointing out that not all the accusations were the same. He wasn't trying to excuse Cosby, just asking for a more thoughtful conversation. It was a difficult, painful tightrope walk that showed how emotionally heavy this chapter was for him. A big part of Malcolm-Jamal Warner's pain during the Cosby scandal wasn't just about the personal accusations. It was about the damage done to the Cosby Show's legacy. He often said the thing that hurt him most was seeing the show pulled from syndication. For Warner, the Cosby Show wasn't just a job. It was a cultural milestone that gave America a different, more positive view of black families. "We've always had the Cosby Show to hold up against that," he said. "And the fact that we no longer have that, that's what saddens me the most. In a few generations, the Huxtables will just be a fairy tale." He was also honest about how the show being pulled hurt him personally. He pointed out the double standard, how work by filmmakers like Woody Allen and Roman Polanski was still being shown, while The Cosby Show was completely erased. He admitted that the financial hit was real, saying, "It's literally taking money out of my pocket." So, while part of his frustration was about culture and representation, part of it was practical too, showing that the fallout affected both his beliefs and his livelihood.
After having had such a long path and long journey, you have something like this that you've got to contend with.
Warner's feelings about the controversy didn't stay the same. They changed over time. At first, he agreed the show's legacy had been tarnished. But then, a conversation with his TV sister, Keshia Knight Pulliam, who played Rudy, shifted his thinking. She reminded him that the show had inspired generations of people, especially young black viewers, to go to college and dream bigger. And that kind of real-world impact couldn't be erased. Warner later said, "Her saying that really shifted my perspective." That moment was a turning point. It helped him move from focusing on what was lost to seeing what the show had already given the world. Instead of letting the scandal define the legacy, he began to argue that its positive impact could still stand on its own. This shift showed Warner's ability to reflect, grow, and hold on to a more hopeful view, one that separates the art and its influence from the mistakes of the man behind it. His emotional journey, from sadness to frustration to reflection and finally resilience, shows a very real, very human way of dealing with something that shook the foundation of his life and career. Perhaps the most surprising thing about Malcolm-Jamal Warner's history is the lack of scandal, and that in itself is telling. In a world where many child stars fall into public struggles, Warner stands out for doing the exact opposite. His calm, steady life wasn't an accident. It was the result of smart choices and serious discipline. From the day The Cosby Show ended, Warner worked hard to separate himself from the character of Theo Huxtable. He even admitted there was a time he didn't like being called Theo at all. That wasn't just an emotional reaction, it was a professional move. He made it his mission to prove he was more than just a childhood role. Warner explored many paths. He directed TV episodes, including Kenan and Kel, became an accomplished musician and spoken word artist, and won a Grammy for Best Traditional R&B Performance. He was even nominated for a Grammy for Best Spoken Word Poetry Album. As an actor, he didn't stick to safe or repetitive roles. He co-starred in the comedy Malcolm and Eddie, took dramatic parts in The Resident, Suits, and Major Crimes, and even showed up in the critically praised American Crime Story, The People vs. O.J. Simpson. This range proves that Warner's steady rise was no accident. It was the result of hard, consistent work to be seen as a real artist, not just a former child star.
They were tired of me fighting with the writers.
What makes Warner's story even more impressive is what's missing. While many of his peers ended up in legal trouble, addiction, or media scandals, Warner has stayed clear. He credits his mother, Pamela, who managed his career and gave him a strong sense of discipline early on. And even back in the 80s, Warner was promoting positive messages long before it was trendy. In his 1988 book, Theo and Me, Growing Up Okay, he gave advice to young fans about staying away from drugs and making good choices. That book wasn't about fame, it was about responsibility. This lack of scandal says a lot. Warner didn't just survive child stardom. He studied what went wrong for others and built a life designed to avoid those same mistakes. His creative growth also tells a powerful story. His early advice book was still tied closely to his TV fame. But as he got older, his work became deeper and more socially aware. His Grammy-nominated spoken word album Hiding in Plain View and his 2017 short film You Can't Hear Me tackled serious issues like mass incarceration, racism, and deportation. These were not surface-level projects. They were rooted in a political and personal awareness that had been shaped early on by his father, who made him study black leaders like Langston Hughes as a kid. Warner's journey from child star to thoughtful artist is no fluke. It's a clear example of what happens when talent meets purpose, and when someone decides to grow on their own terms, no matter what the spotlight demands. Beyond the professional challenges of the Cosby scandal, some of the most defining moments in Malcolm-Jamal Warner's life were personal. Private heartbreaks that quietly shaped how he approached love, fame, and privacy. These weren't public controversies, but deeply emotional experiences that left lasting marks on his life and outlook. One of the most significant tragedies came in his early adulthood. The death of Michelle Thomas, his former girlfriend and Cosby Show co-star, who played Justine, Theo's on-screen love interest. Though their romantic relationship ended in 1994, they remained incredibly close. In 1997, Thomas was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive stomach cancer. When she passed away in December 1998, at just 30 years old, Warner was reportedly by her side. Losing someone so young, someone who had shared both the spotlight and a deep bond with him, was a heartbreaking confrontation with mortality. And he handled it far from the public eye, with quiet grace and deep reflection. It's a loss that likely helped shape his calm, thoughtful, and serious perspective on life and love.
As I remind myself that no matter what's going on, there's always a reason to smile. Like if you just take a minute to stop and take stock, I guarantee you can find at least one reason to smile.
Years later, Warner found himself in a very different kind of relationship. This time, one that played out under the harsh light of public attention. From 2011 to 2013, he was in a high-profile romance with actress Regina King. The two had known each other since their teenage fame days in the 80s and even lived together. But their breakup in 2013 came suddenly and became a hot topic in the media. Tabloids reported that Warner had unexpectedly asked King and her son to move out. The story turned even more dramatic when King later suggested in a 2015 interview that he had broken up with her on Valentine's Day, only to send flowers afterward with a note that read, "I still love you." She said she threw the flowers away. That painful, very public breakup was a sharp contrast to the private, quiet grief he had experienced with Michelle Thomas. While the first loss deepened his appreciation for real connection, the second heartbreak seemed to push him toward a firm boundary when it came to sharing his personal life. After the Regina King breakup, Warner became extremely private about his relationships, rarely discussing them in interviews or on social media. Together, these two life experiences taught him powerful lessons: how fragile and precious love can be, and how destructive it can become when turned into public spectacle. One loss was a private sorrow that strengthened his emotional depth. The other was a public ordeal that reinforced his need to protect his peace. These lessons helped shape the grounded, thoughtful man Warner would ultimately become. Fans are now connecting the dots, and the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. It seems that every time a black celebrity begins to peel back the layers, begins to speak with honesty, challenge the system, or reclaim the narrative, tragedy strikes. Warner, much like others before him, was stepping into a new chapter. He wasn't just reflecting on the past, he was reimagining the future. Through his podcast, He had built a safe space to explore the complexity of Black identity, one that wasn't filtered through Hollywood's glossy, sanitized lens. And that space, as small as it may have seemed, was dangerous to the status quo.
And we still think it's dope. Just like the music we're programmed to celebrate.
Then there's the Meghan Markle moment. Subtle, but telling. In an earlier podcast appearance on The Touré Show, Warner was asked what it was like working with Markle during their time on Suits. He gave what sounded like a diplomatic answer at first, calling her cool and nice. But when asked if he knew she was Black, his reply took a sharper turn. The great thing is that she knew, he said.
Okay.
At first glance, it seems like a compliment, but the subtext? That's where things get interesting. Warner wasn't praising Markle. He was implying something deeper, that she knew but didn't always show it, that her proximity to whiteness was a choice, and that maybe, just maybe, the Hollywood machine preferred her that way. Warner didn't say it outright. He didn't have to. It was all in the tone, in the pause, in the weight of those words. It was a subtle critique, and one that's now being re-examined through a whole new lens.
It was cool. We didn't really have scenes together, so I'd see her, and she was really nice, really cool. My best friend, I was talking about Chris.
Yeah.
This is the same industry, after all, that lifted Warner up as a child star in the 1980s, then watched as he quietly built a meaningful career as a director, musician, and advocate, all while keeping him at arm's length. Warner was never part of the headline-hungry, paparazzi-fueled crowd. He worked, he created, he elevated conversations, and yet his death was barely acknowledged by the Hollywood elite. No major memorial specials, no primetime tributes, just a few quiet headlines and a whole lot of silence. For a man who shaped a generation's childhood, that silence is deafening. The more people look back at Warner's final podcast episode, the more it feels like a man who was trying to leave a breadcrumb trail. He was talking about cultural erasure, about how Black soldiers fought for freedoms they never got to enjoy, about how the hood, despite being demonized, was the birthplace of so much American greatness. He was redefining success, not by what you have, but by what you survive. And now he's gone, right when those messages were finally getting traction. It's no longer just a coincidence. Warner's death fits into a long list of tragedies that seem to strike just as truth-tellers reach their peak. Chadwick Boseman passed after quietly battling cancer, while releasing roles that challenged whitewashed narratives. Nipsey Hussle was gunned down after preaching ownership and community investment. Dave Chappelle was nearly canceled for walking away from a corrupt industry and daring to speak his mind. And now, Warner, who had finally found a platform to be unfiltered, is gone.
I had this show and felt like people was trying to control me. I was freaked out. I don't know, I just had to get out of there. I just walked away. It says $50 million, it's all gone, I'm scared.
We're not saying it was a conspiracy, but we are saying it feels suspicious. Because whenever someone tries to pull back the curtain on Hollywood's sanitized version of blackness, when they start celebrating the parts that aren't profitable or start talking about struggle instead of success, something happens. And it usually ends with heartbreak. Malcolm-Jamal Warner deserved more than a headline. He deserved more than a footnote in the gossip blogs. He was a man with a message, one that challenged everything we've been told to accept. And now that message is all we have left. It's time we listen to it before someone else disappears. That's it for today. See you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.